Welcome to this Cork University Press MindYourself Explorations, which is a series of short introductory conversations inviting a wide engagement with the themes and topics of our Mind Yourself book series. My name is Mike Collins, Publications Director of Cork University Press. Cork University Press is proud of this particularly poignant series, which is of interest to a wide readership, dealing with issues of care, recovery, and resilience that are relevant and beneficial to us all. To give you a bit of background on Cork University Press, we were founded in 1925, shortly after the formation of the Irish Free State. The press is wholly owned by University College Cork, and our remit is to publish peer-reviewed books in Irish studies in its widest sense. One of the aims of both Cork University Press and UCC is to enhance our community engagement. The Mind Yourself book series has been designed to bring safe, researched, peer-reviewed information from frontline professionals to help people mind themselves. The first title in the series is Personal Struggles by Seán Ruth, and that is the book we will be discussing tonight. The second book in the series is called Uncertainty Rules by Richard Plenty and Terry Morrissey. Uncertainty is currently a hot topic. As our societies have become more complex, the level of uncertainty has increased. And this is particularly so during the pandemic. This book starts by explaining why uncertainty has increased, the challenges this brings, and why it is likely to continue to be a feature in all of our lives over this century. The most recent book in this series is called Rewriting Our Stories: Education, Empowerment and Well-Being by Derek Gladwin. Many of our fears are stories that we tell ourselves, even if they are largely fictional and rooted in socio-cultural belief systems. The result is that we often feel helpless in the face of those fears. This transformational book considers a potent antidote. By recognizing our recurring negative stories, we can rewrite and transform them to achieve greater empowerment and well-being in our lives. As part of UCC Community Week, Cork University Press is delighted to welcome series editor Dr Mari Murray in conversation with Organisational Psychologist and author of the first book in the series, Personal Struggles, by Dr Seán Ruth. Let me now introduce you to Mari and Seán. Dr Mari Murray has worked as a clinical psychologist for more than 40 years across the entire development spectrum. Mari gained her PhD from UCD. She is a chartered psychologist and a registered family therapist and supervisor. Her key clinical posts have included being Director of Psychology in St Vincent Psychiatric Hospital, Dublin, and Director of Student Counsel Services in UCD. Mari's appointment as series editor to the Cork University Press Mind Yourself series gathers a lifetime of professional experience to bring safe clinical information to general and professional readers. Dr. Seán Ruth is an organisational psychologist and author of Leadership and Liberation: A Psychological Approach and High-Quality Leadership, a self-assessment guide for individuals and teams. He specializes in the areas of leadership development, conflict resolution, and diversity. And if you want to find more information about Seán's work, you can find out that on his website, seanruth.com. As explorations, Seán, Mari, and I hope that these conversations will serve as introductions and provocations, inspiring and inviting deeper engagement and further dialogue.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this Mind Yourself Explorations, this series of conversations about topics related to the Mind Yourself book series. I'm Dr. Mary Murray, series editor of Cork University Press MindYourself book series. The Mind Yourself series, as you know, is designed to bring safe, researched information from frontline professionals to people. And while at one level, information about everything is available everywhere on multiple platforms, relying on that information has become problematic in a world of misinformation, disinformation, and misdirection, in which we have to ask, what can we believe in? What's true? What can we trust? How can we be safe? So the Mind Yourself series was created to redress this, because it's delivered by professionals in whom readers can really have absolute confidence. So welcome to this series. For this first segment in the Mind Yourself Exploration series, I'm here with Dr. Seán Ruth, Organisational Psychologist and Specialist in the areas of leadership development, conflict resolution, and diversity. Seán's book, Personal Struggles, Oppression, Healing and Liberation, it's the perfect book with which to launch these Mind Yourself explorations, because it addresses the struggles for which people blame themselves before realising that they're not to blame. Seán invites us to recognise social injustice, inequalities of opportunity, unequal power, and to open our eyes to the pain of discrimination in all its forms. And anyone who has suffered discrimination knows just how painful that can be. So it's lovely to be here talking to you, Seán, and maybe you can tell us a little about how this book came about.
Thank you, Mary. I suppose in a way this book is it represents both a personal and a professional journey. I grew up in a small town, and from a very early age I was struck by the differences that I saw around me, and I was struck by the struggles that I could see in people's lives. There were differences in the lives that people had. They struggled with discrimination, they struggled with inequality, they struggled with violence, and many other challenges that faced them. And for me as a young person, this was very confusing, because I couldn't figure out why those differences existed. And I couldn't figure out why some people's lives were harder than others. And what was also striking was that nobody seemed to talk much about it. Everybody seemed to accept that these things were normal. And if they did make reference to it, it was generally to indicate that these things happened because this was the way life was, or because it was due to their own inadequacies, their own personal feelings. But for me as a young person, that didn't make much sense. So when I went to university, I thought, well, I'll study psychology and see if it can give me answers as to why people struggle. And I quickly discovered that psychology actually had very few answers for me, that psychology didn't seem to deal with the day-to-day reality of ordinary people's lives. And if it did refer to any of these things, it tended to see things in terms of people's personality and in terms of, again, some kind of personal inadequacies that people had. So again, this I didn't find this very useful. And the book, in a sense, represents my attempts to answer those questions and provide an alternative picture of people's struggles and why they struggle.
And I think, Sean, that's one of the things that really emerges in it, in the tone and the content and the way that you develop it, that acute awareness of the extent to which people can struggle enormously, as we said, blaming themselves for problems that are not of their making, or social constructs or stereotypes about them. And I'm thinking of, the work of John Burnham, who developed the idea of the social graces, with the G, standing for gender and geography, and then we've race and religion and age and ability and appearance and class and culture and ethnicity and orientation and spiritual. There are so many ways in which people can be discriminated against, and even sometimes unknowingly. So that really makes this a hugely significant issue, Sean. And I'm just wondering, how do we even begin to address that?
Well, in one sense, Mary, you've touched on it with the idea of social graces. What I find most useful is to think in terms of identity. Now, most people think of themselves as a single identity. They describe it as their personality. But actually, when you think about this a bit more, it's clear that each of us is a mix of different identities. So if I think about myself, I'm male, I'm middle class, I'm white, I'm Irish, and so on. And some of those identities that we have, some of those are identities within which we've experienced oppression. We've found ourselves discriminated against or marginalized in one way or another. And some of those identities are identities of privilege and power. They're identities within which we are part of an oppressor group within the society. So essentially, each of us is a mix of these. And the book, in a sense, is exploring how that works, how that affects us. And in particular, it's exploring the hurt that this does. We, in order to get us to take on these identities and the roles that go with them, we have to be hurt in all kinds of ways. So the book is exploring all of that.
And I think that for me, when I was reading it, it struck me how blind one can be about their identity in relation to this. And what it offered was the opportunity to look at what are the situations in which I am marginalized, in which I may be discriminated against, in which life may be unfair for me. And then also the corollary to look at, how am I privileged? What are these privileges that I take for granted? I've always felt, for example, the benefit of education, what an extraordinary privilege that is. And I think that the book really invites that, doesn't it, Sean?
Yeah, and there's a whole journey, as I described it earlier, there's a whole journey involved in clarifying and bringing these things to awareness. And a key part of that is, and it in a sense is a theme of the book, that all of the struggles that we face within these different identities, we end up giving ourselves a hard time because life is hard and we're struggling with it. But in actual fact, the struggles are situated in a social context, and they're related to what happens to us under these various identities. And some of these are easier to untangle, particularly the places where we feel oppressed. Some of them are harder to untangle, especially the what I call the oppressor identities, because we tend not to think of ourselves in those terms. And it's interesting, for example, that many oppressor groups, and I can say more about this in other segments, but many oppressor groups tend not to even think of themselves as an identity or as a group. So white people tend not to think of themselves as white. Many men don't even think of themselves as men. And this becomes part of the difficulty and part of the confusion for people. And I hope that the book throws light on these various pieces of the struggles that people face in their lives.
Yeah. So that is, I think, you know, in this initial segment, it really sets out the territory, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Who am I? What's my identity? What do I claim? What do I recognize? What am I unaware of? How do I interpret others, consciously or unconsciously? And I suppose at some level, how are we all constructed and socially constructed in different contexts, and the impact of that on us? And I think for me, that was one of the most valuable things. As I read, I thought, gosh, I'm so glad to be thinking about this, reflecting on it, either being reminded or made conscious of it. And then I really want to know what now, what forms does it take? So Seán, thank you very much for this conversation about that aspect. And we will be exploring other aspects of the topic in additional interviews with you, and really looking forward to that. And I know that the next segment we're going to look at is internalized oppression, and that's a very big area. We're also delighted that you have joined Mind Yourself Explorations. The authors and Cork University Press hope that the Mind Yourself series finds its way to all who need it, and that it gives readers the tools and resources to really mind themselves. And if you want to explore this further, please go to the website mindyourselfbooks.ie.